Hello and welcome to Irresistible You, Ignite Your Passion and Purpose. I'm your host, Karen Seltz, also known as the Uncensored Self-Love Coach. I'm so happy that you've joined me today. And if you are new to me, there's really only three things that you need to know. The first thing is that if you have a deeper calling that you haven't yet stepped into, I completely get it. I was on that path for so long, and I am still on the path of discovering more and more. And I'm happy to be on the path with you, alongside you. The second thing that you need to know is really my superpower is that of being a divine mirror. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that when I look at people, I see them in their possibilities, in using their gifts, fully expressing who they came here to be. And I'm able to reflect that back to people until they see it for themselves. And they're like, oh, I get it now. Finally, I get it. And the third thing that you need to know, if you're new to me, is that I am uncensored in my approach. I am willing to do whatever I'm called to do, say whatever I'm called to say, and go wherever I'm called to go to serve you and to help you get to the breakthrough that you are here in this life to create. This week, I'm going to talk about spiritual bypassing. Now, I used to hear that term a lot. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? And it doesn't mean what it sounds like it means. For me, it's more about avoiding what's uncomfortable. And in the last couple of weeks, I've had some major things shift in my life. And it's led me to these feelings of like, oh, I'm so uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. And so I've been vacillating between feeling the feelings, honoring them, being sad, grieving, and then wanting to numb these feelings, like saying, this sucks, I want out of here. Give me some chocolate, give me some ice cream, give me Bridgerton or whatever the heck I'm watching on Netflix. So who can relate to that, right? Like, it gets to be too much. And it got me thinking like, okay, what do I want to share this week that people can relate to? And what do we do when it gets uncomfortable? What do we do? So I'm going to share with you like what was going on for me. So I was coaching in this transformational leadership program for 13 months straight. And it was a volunteer position. And I coached hundreds of people, literally hundreds. So I felt like I was really making a difference for people. People were having massive breakthroughs that I was part of. I was facilitating those for people. And I felt useful and I felt valuable and I felt like I had authority. And these are really interesting concepts because one of my patterns is looking outside of myself for validation. And I don't know if you can relate to that, but over the last couple of weeks, I'm like, oh, here it is again, where I was looking, at other people to validate me rather than validating myself, knowing that I am valuable no matter what I do. Like, I don't have to do anything to be valuable. I just am valuable. And I contribute everywhere I go when that's my intention. I can contribute to my barista at Starbucks by simply treating them as a human being and asking them how their day is going, instead of making it all about me, thinking, oh, I'm the customer, so it's just an attitude a lot of times. So the other thing that shifted for me is I was in a 5-month romantic relationship, and that also ended right around the same time that I stopped coaching the leadership. So I had this void. And in this void, there was like a vacuum of time, like, okay, what am I going to do with myself? How am I going to contribute? What am I going to do with my time? Because in the past, if I had too much time, I'm like, oh, I can do that later. I'll do it later. I'll do it, in an hour. And then an hour would never come. I would just fill it with all kinds of minutia that added up to a whole lot of wasted time. So I was in this transition period, in this void. And Sabina, please. I love live. You gotta love it. So I was in this void and I'm like, what am I going to do? And in the past, I would get very little accomplished, very little done. Okay, so this is the joy of being a single parent. This is how life is sometimes. So we get to roll with it. So I apologize for the chaos outside my door. So if everybody could just send some energy to my daughter, she's having a rough time. I'm not sure why, but I'm just going to send her some love. So this concept of spiritual bypassing, I think it's a really important one to examine. Oh man. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. I'm sorry to laugh, but I'm not. It's just life. It's life in the Big Apple. So what is spiritual bypassing? So spiritual bypassing refers to the use of spiritual explanations to avoid personal or emotional unfinished business, to convince yourself that things are better or different than they really are, or to also, we can use it against ourselves to diminish our basic needs or our feelings and say, like, other people have it worse than I do. You might be thinking that about me right now, as this is what's happening in my environment. So sometimes we use it against ourselves. And I want to give you an example. I used to be in this relationship, and it was interesting because I had this spiritual ideal that I'm like, okay, this is where I want to be. And so I would pretend that I was there, and I wasn't. And I would deny what I was really experiencing. I would be like, well, that's not really how I am. And it was so much denial, instead of saying, this is where I want to be, and this is where I am, and there's a big gap there. There's a big gap. So I would just pretend, and then things would blow up. So an example of that is, so I had a boyfriend who I would see like half the week because he had his kids half the week. And I would pretend like I was enlightened, and because I wanted to be. So it wasn't like I was trying to scam him, but he would want to see his friends occasionally on the days when he didn't have his kids. Makes sense. He's a good dad. And I wanted to be okay with that, but I wasn't. Like, my abandonment wounds would get triggered, and I'd be like, oh, I'm not important. He doesn't love me. He loves his friends more than me. And I would create all these stories, and then I would punish him. Like, he would pay for that. And eventually, it got to be too much chaos for him. And he's like, well, this is just too much. And he was out of there. And now I can see it. Back then, I just thought, he couldn't handle certain things, but it's really fascinating. So that is one example of spiritual bypassing. So another one, some examples are avoiding reality of what's really happening in the world. So one way that I still do this is I don't really watch the news very much, because it brings me down. It brings down my vibration, and I want to put positive things in my mind. So I make the choice to avoid some things. I mean, I know what's going on, but I don't spend a lot of time there, if that makes sense. So for some people, what that could look like would be like, you've experienced something tragic in your life, and you're like looking for the silver lining before you experience the grief of that tragedy, of that trauma. So for example, I had a relationship end, and I could say, well, he wasn't the one for me. I know we weren't in alignment, which is true, but I still get to grieve the good parts of it. I still get to grieve what was there, what did work, the love that we shared, the bond that we shared, the fun that we had. So that's another example of that. Deflecting uncomfortable subjects. Oh my gosh, I have a history of that. I don't know if you can relate, but if somebody still has different political views than I do, or different religious views, and I feel like they're trying to convince me I will bob and weave and change the subject so fast because I don't want to create separation. I want to be unified. I want to be together. I want harmony. So that's one thing that I will do. Pretending to be happy when you're not, I mean, who hasn't done that? Like, put on a happy face. Well, yeah, there's a time and a place for that. But if you're doing it constantly and not honoring those feelings that are there, you will get stuck there in this depression that's right underneath the surface. Blaming others for how you feel. A lot of times people use spiritual language like, I'm an empath, so I pick up all the negativity of the world and it's not my fault. But it is a choice. Like, we get to learn, even if you are an empath, you get to learn how to manage your energy. And there are a zillion resources on that, right? Like, we can find information on anything. So anytime we feel like we are a victim of anything, we get to realize that, especially as adults, I'm not going to talk about childhood because that's a whole nother story. But as an adult, you are always at choice for how you perceive things, how you choose to look at them. And what spiritual bypassing is about is not honoring the feelings and just like moving on. Okay, moving on, and being detached instead of being with it. But there's a balance here. Like, you get to realize, like, okay, how did I create this? What did I want to learn from this? Because your soul wanted something. Anytime you have a situation where you feel like you were victimized, your soul created it for something. Like, there's some lesson in it for you. So it's just a matter of looking at it without beating yourself up. So if you find yourself going to, like, gosh, where you really feel like a victim, because those are addictive states. I was completely addicted to being a victim and I had no idea. I was always looking for sympathy, and I knew exactly which cards to play. Like, okay, this one will play really well. Like, that's a really good story that I've created over the years. And the more we tell stories, the better they get. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but that's how it works. Let me see, one second. Oh, it's not moving. All right, hold on. Let me stop the share and then I will reshare. Give me a second. Okay, there we go. Looking outside of yourself. And it could be at like gurus, teachers, astrology, signs, anywhere you're looking that's not inside. And man, I can relate to this one. I don't know if you can, but I used to collect certifications, letters after my name. I have so many degrees and certifications. And my reason was, like, I never felt like I was enough. I didn't feel like I knew enough to be taken seriously. I didn't feel like I could contribute. I didn't feel valuable. And I always felt like I needed to learn more. And this is interesting because this just came up for me last week while I was in this like uncomfortable situation. I attended like a free class and I almost invested thousands of dollars in this program that I don't need. I have everything I need. I have taken every single coaching program known to man. I have everything I need. And I was just in that uncomfortable space. So it wasn't from a place of alignment. And to add to me, it was like trying to fill something I thought was lacking. And there's a big difference to, between up leveling your skills and knowing like, oh yeah, this is a hell yeah for me. And like, oh gosh, I feel like I'm lacking something. So let me fill it with something that's out here, because that never works. Looking for a sign rather than acknowledging that you create everything you see. Now, this is it's a pretty high level spiritual concept that everything that I see out here is a reflection of what's going on in my mind and in my heart. And if you look at any situation where there's more than one person involved and you ask them for their factual account of events, you will get a different version from every single person. You just will, because we all perceive facts through our filter, which is, our past experiences. We never see things as they are. We see things as we are. So if we're looking for a sign, again, it's something outside of ourselves. Now, it's different from things that flow or confirmation that you're on the right track. That's a little different. But if you're like, okay, if you want me to get a divorce, make it rain. Like something, I don't know, I think that's a little crazy, a little extreme. But we do things like that because we don't want to be accountable. We don't want to make a decision. We don't want to be wrong. All those things are ways that we bypass that uncomfortable feeling again. Oh gosh, this was one of my favorites. Okay, so thinking prayer and meditation alone would bring me everything that I wanted. So I used to pray and meditate like all day long and never do a thing. I wouldn't take any action to back it up. So I would pray and I would ask for guidance. I would receive guidance and then I wouldn't act on it. I'd be like, okay, the divine will bring it to me. It'll put clients in my lap or, nothing happens. So it's being accountable, being responsible, going with the guidance that you receive. Yes, prayer and meditation are fantastic windows to who we are as souls. When I get ungrounded, when I forget the truth of who I am, I will either call somebody who knows and I'll say, hey, I forgot the truth of who I am. Could you remind me, please? Or I'll go into prayer and meditation. And then I remember, right? So it's this dance, like we forget who we are, then we remember, we're reminded. So we get to take inspired action though. We can't just sit around. Do you guys remember the movie The Secret? Where it was like, okay, visualize the car you want, visualize all this, and it will come to you. Well, that doesn't really work. It was proved that there's a lot more steps to it than what they put on. You can't just like have a vision board and then things don't just come. There are more steps to it. So that's what I'm talking about not taking inspired action, because we get to move our feet. We get to move in the direction of our goals if we want anything different in our lives. Avoiding anything you perceive as negative or a bummer. That includes people like, I cut off that relationship because that person was draining me, or, I don't like to go to that place anymore because the energy is negative, which sometimes you get to do that. You get to watch your energy and you get to make choices that are in alignment because, in this realm, we have only so much time, right? So we get to choose what we do with it. But if we're avoiding things that are negative as a way of avoiding our calling or avoiding our next cut or not being courageous, if we're avoiding things that are going to take us closer to our goals, we get to just be aware of it and notice it. That's all. So the next thing is like, is it bad? Is spiritual bypassing, is it a bad thing? Well, sometimes it's normal if we do it temporarily. Like I was doing some of it and I would make choices. I'm like, okay, I've cried enough today. Can I fit in one episode of Schitt's Creek to make me laugh a little? Like, yeah, I can handle that. And so it's like a little bit of avoidance of the negativity, but it's a balance. Like I'm honoring the feelings and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to take a break from those feelings for a minute. So it can help you to deal with something temporarily, as long as you don't stay there, like go a whole day without feeling a feeling, then you're on the wrong track. I gotta tell you. And when we suppress those emotions, they're going to come up like a freaking volcano, and usually at inopportune times with people that didn't deserve it, or pets. A lot of times I hear pets get it. So just, be aware of yourself. How do you know you're doing it? So if you are not living in the now, if you're like constantly like in the future or in the past or like in the spiritual realm, then you're most likely doing the spiritual bypass process. If you're overemphasizing the positive and avoiding the negative, you're like, oh, life's great. People ask you how you're doing, people that really care about you, not the clerk at the store that doesn't give a crap, but people that really care about you. And you're like, oh, everything's great, or you'll like cite the Bible or some spiritual rhetoric or some quote, when inside you're dying. Inside you're like, oh my gosh, I'm hurting. I wish somebody could just hold me. Then that's spiritual bypass. You get to be seen, you get to be held, you get to be witnessed in your pain in order to transmute it, to turn it into something positive. We can't bypass, we can't just skip it. Can't skip the pain. Otherwise, it just comes up later. So if you're being self-righteous about anything like enlightenment, where you're comparing yourself like, oh, that person's not woke or I'm woke or whatever. Anytime we get stuck in comparison of any kind, we're thinking with the ego mind. And if you are being self-righteous about enlightenment or anything spiritual about like, oh, I'm up here spiritually because I've done X, Y, and Z, then that can also be spiritual bypass. If you are detached from reality, like you're denying it, you're pushing it away, you're resisting it, that is a form of spiritual bypass, and it will come back and bite you in the ass. If you are being idealistic, like for example, like in dating, like I will only date men that are XYZ. They make over $1 million a year. They drive this kind of car. They have this kind of house. They're woke. They meditate. They pray. They work out, you know, whatever. I mean, you could have a list of a zillion things or one thing. But if you're being overly idealistic, especially if you are not those things, if you're just pretending to be, that's spiritual bypass. And then again, like if you have feelings of entitlement or superiority, like I deserve this. And feeling like you deserve things is a fantastic thing for most of us, because every single person I've ever met who's being honest has some form of I am not enough. Now it could be I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, I'm not deserving, I don't deserve abundance, I don't deserve good things, but everybody has some form of it. So a little bit of it or some of it where it's healthy, where you're right sized, where you're acknowledging your gifts and using them. You're not just like sitting on them and saying, oh no, not me. Then that's something to strive toward. That's not spiritual bypassing. But when you're like, oh, I deserve the best because I'm up here, but you're really not, then that could be a form of bypass. So what can you do about it? What can you do about this spiritual bypass stuff? You can avoid labeling emotions as good or bad, because when we label them, we put ourselves in a box. If we label them as bad, what are we going to do? We're going to say, oh no, I don't want that. That's bad. I don't want to be sad. That's bad. I don't want to be angry. That's bad. Well, they just are. I mean, they all have a vibration, and you get to experience them to let them move through you. That's the main thing. The second thing is like, remember that all events are neutral. Remember when I was talking about if you have more than one person at a place, they will all describe the facts of the event completely differently. That's because the event itself is neutral until we ascribe meaning to it. We judge it. And then we also get to remember that all of our thoughts serve a purpose. Now, for me, when I think something and I become aware of it, even if it's something I don't want to think anymore, the moment I catch it, I'm like, yes, I caught it. I caught that thought, because before it would have gone unnoticed for who knows how long. It would have gone unnoticed. So I celebrate every time I catch a thought, whether it's one that I want or don't want. I celebrate it. I'm like, yeah, I caught it. And if it's something that I don't want, I'm like, okay, what do I want to replace it with? What would I rather have? What story would I rather create? And I look at that instead. So that's kind of a fun way to play with it. It's a higher level of awareness, because most of our thoughts, because we think 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day, and 95% of them are exactly the same thoughts we thought yesterday. So the reticular activating system, the RAS, is the screening part of our brain. And it tells us, it's like, this is what you want to pay attention to. This is important information. And most of it's not. So if you want your brain to start catching some of your limiting beliefs, you get to tell it, I want you to look for this. I want you to tell me, make me aware when I do this behavior. And then when it does alert you to it, you get to say, yes, I caught it. It's working. And then you get to write a new story. You get to say, what's a more empowering version of this? What else is possible? I mean, there's a zillion questions you can ask yourself. So that's fun to play with. So also keep in mind that uncomfortable feelings are a sign that something is out of alignment for you and want your attention to create a shift. Or it could be that you are ready to heal something big. So it's always like, there's always different ways to look at it. I was reading something this week that said, like, our biggest teachers are not the people that we look up to. They're the people that piss us off. They're the people that trigger us. You're like, oh gosh, I want to wring his neck, or I want to like smack that person. Like, what is wrong with them? Because they are bringing up the parts of us that are ready to be healed. And we cannot see anything outside of ourselves. So when we see somebody else and that something in them triggers us, it's either some part of us that we've rejected or some part that we're like, oh, I would die if I had that quality. But either way, it's ready to be healed or you wouldn't be triggered by it. So that's kind of fun. There, I get that. I wrote the end because I wanted to know when to stop sharing. So that is spiritual bypassing. I hope that that served you and that you got some good nuggets out of that. And I wanted to switch gears a little bit here and offer you guys something, because oftentimes the women that come to me for coaching are ones that have a higher calling. They have a deeper calling, and they've been like saying, oh no, not me, I couldn't do that. Like, who am I to think I could serve people, to think that I could do anything differently? So they keep putting it on the back burner, and it keeps tapping them on the shoulder like, So I did that for years, many, many years. I had that happening, and I'm like, I just kept ignoring it. I kept playing small and hiding until it was so loud and I was so uncomfortable that I couldn't ignore it anymore. But it was a lot of years of suffering for me, like avoiding that, being unfulfilled in my career, in my relationships, with who I was, pretending to be all spiritual and woke. And I was like just in pain. I was depressed. I was addicted. I was suicidal at one point. And so what I am offering is a free 45-minute possibilities call with me. So if I'm talking to you, like if like there's something more inside of you that's ready to be expressed and that this is your time, I invite you to book a call with me at connectwithkaren.us. connectwithkaren.us. And that'll take you directly to my personal calendar. We'll hop on a call within the next few days, and we will go into like, what is it that keeps calling you? What is that thing that keeps tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, now's the time, you're meant for more? And we'll also look at what has stopped you up until now, and we'll create a plan to get you there. So if this is you, I invite you, it's no risk, like it's a free call, just book a call. It's connectwithkaren.us. And I will be so excited to talk with the first 5 people that book a call. I thank you so much for watching Irresistible You, Ignite Your Passion and Purpose. I will see you next week right here.